June 3rd, 1944 German 15th Army Headquarters, Pas-de-Calais. Rain taps lightly on the tiled roof of a stone villa, commandeered by Oberst Karl-Heinz Kramer, whose cigarette smoke coils through the dim candlelight. Maps sprawl across the oak desk, cluttered with unit placements, bunker diagrams, and aerial reconnaissance of what Berlin insists is the most likely Allied landing zone. Calais. A knock interrupts. Hauptmann Dieter Schultz enters, uniform soaked from the drizzle, a telegram in hand. "From Berlin," he says, tapping the paper. More naval chatter out of southern England. Something big is moving. Kramer smirks. Bah, let them move. They'll never land armor across beachheads. Not in force, not under fire. He gestures to a grainy black and white photograph pinned to the wall, one captured by Abwehr agents in Portsmouth. Rows of squat, open-decked boats with wooden planks and steel ramps. They're calling them landings, Boot. Floating coffins, no armor, no seaworthiness. You hit one shell on those ramps, the whole operation collapses. Schultz, younger, less seasoned, frowns. "But thousands of them, sir. If they swarm, they'll break apart on the tide," Kramer cuts in, confident. "They can't land tanks on sand." The German officer's laughter drowns the sound of thunder rolling in from the English Channel. June 4th, 1944, Portsmouth Naval Base, England. A world away, in the wind-whipped dark of England's southern coast, men aren't laughing. Private Louis Ferraro, 1st Infantry Division, shivers under a soaked poncho, his boots squelching on the steel deck of a strange, ugly craft. No bigger than a truck, with a blunt ramp for a front. It looks nothing like a warship and everything like a carpenter's box. "This thing gonna float, Sarge," he mutters. Sergeant Horace Briggs, grizzled and calm, glances over. Floats well enough to ruin a German's day. Around them, thousands of Higgins boats bob like driftwood in the rising chop. Painted navy gray, bristling with carbon soot and diesel fumes. They're crammed with gear, bodies, and anticipation. The flat-bottomed hulls rock uncomfortably in the waves, no keel, no anchor, just purpose. Above the harbor, barrage balloons drift like tethered whales. The scent of oil and brine cuts the air. Officers shout orders, runners dart between companies, and loudspeakers crackle with updates. The weather's turned again, maybe a delay. In the control room of the headquarters ship Largs, General Eisenhower stands at the window, arms folded, flanked by Admiral Ramsey and Air Chief Marshal Lee Mallory. "If we wait too long," Eisenhower mutters, "we lose the tide. If we go too early, we drown them." He turns, face grim. We move on the 6th, June 5th, 1944, at sea, English Channel. At midnight, under cloud cover, the invasion fleet, over 5,000 ships, slides into the dark like ghosts. The largest amphibious armada in human history is underway. In LCVP 931, Private Ferraro clutches his M1 Garand, staring at the steel ramp just inches from his boots. Above him, spray lashes against the canvas canopy as the Higgins boat slaps across the waves. The boat creaks. The diesel engine whines. Men vomit quietly into helmets. Somewhere ahead, in the black void, is Omaha Beach. On the German shore, in the bunkers above the Atlantic Wall, Sergeant Helmut Kruger adjusts his MG-42 on the ledge of WN-62. His breath mists in the cold dawn air. He spots flashes on the horizon, too wide, too fast. "Herr Leutnant," lights at sea. Within minutes, the entire sky glows orange. Naval guns roar from battleships anchored miles offshore. Shells scream overhead, smashing into pillboxes, wire, and hedgerows. And then, as the smoke lifts, the gray specks appear. Hundreds, then thousands. Open-decked, flat-bottomed, and swarming toward the beach like ants from hell. The Higgins boats have arrived. June 6th, 1944, 6:30, hours, Omaha Beach. The ramp slams down. Machine gun fire erupts instantly, stitching water and men. The front of the LCVP is a death trap, bullets tearing through the airspace the ramp just exposed. Ferraro dives into waist-deep surf, boots sinking into shingle. All around him, Higgins boats are unloading squads, some into knee-high surf, others into chaos. The flat hulls let them ride high over sandbars and surf, opening just enough space to drop men, jeeps, even Sherman tanks directly onto the beach. But the Germans are ready. MG-42s scream. 88mm shells burst, and mortar fire turns water into red mist. Some boats catch fire before unloading. Some capsize in the undertow, but others dozens, then hundreds make it. And they keep coming. Each one carries 36 men. Each wave lands 1,000 more. Higgins' ugly ducklings, the boats, the Germans, mocked as useless, now deliver a tidal wave of fire and steel onto Fortress Europe. And in the bunkers above, Kramer's voice trembles for the first time. How did they get so many? 1,938 New Orleans, Louisiana. The Mississippi River steams in the summer heat, heavy with the scent of mud and diesel. In the city's 9th Ward, past the red brick warehouses and shrimping docks, sits a workshop that doesn't look like much: tin roof, wood frame, thick with sawdust. But inside, sparks fly. Timber clatters. Men shout measurements. This is Higgins Industries, and the man yelling loudest is Andrew Jackson Higgins. He isn't military. He isn't polished. But his voice carries. Sharp as a table saw. No, again, get the bow higher. You're dragging water in the turn. Andrew Higgins is a force of nature. Thick-jawed, constantly pacing, he curses like a sailor and builds like a god. A self-made businessman and boat designer, he once built shallow draft boats for loggers and oilmen in the Louisiana swamps, boats that could glide over sandbars, reverse in tight canals, and survive in mud-choked water where traditional hulls would die. The Navy had laughed at him, until the Marines asked for a landing craft. They needed something small, fast, and capable of dropping men onto a beach not near it. Previous attempts had failed or bogged down in surf. But Higgins' Eureka boat, made of marine plywood and featuring a revolutionary shallow V-hull, could do it all. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't armored. But it worked. And in 1941, the U.S. Navy placed its first order. 1,942. 1,943 Higgins Industries. Goes to war. By the time the U.S. enters World War II, Higgins Industries explodes from a regional workshop to a war machine. Under Higgins' command, New Orleans becomes a city of boatyards. 7 factories run 24/7, building over 20,000 landing craft. One is the LCVP landing craft, vehicle, personnel, what the troops will call the Higgins boat. The design is brilliant in its simplicity. A 36 capacity. A 36-foot-long plywood hull. A ramp that drops in the front. 2 gunners in steel-walled nests for suppressive fire. It's built fast, cheap, and in massive quantities. Men, vehicles, even tanks can deploy straight into combat from its yawning front ramp. Higgins, ever the firebrand, insists on integrated labor forces hiring thousands of black workers, women, and immigrants at equal wages. We'll take anyone who can build a boat, he tells the press, ignoring the Jim Crow laws of the Deep South. By 1943, Eisenhower himself will declare, Andrew Higgins is the man who won the war for us. Spring 1944, England. Across the Atlantic, Higgins boats now crowd the southern harbors of England like driftwood on the tide. At Southampton, Portsmouth, Weymouth, every port teems with men and machines training to load, ride, and disembark from these wooden boxes. British commanders remain skeptical. General Bernard Montgomery voices concerns. Too light, too flat. We can't rely on these in rough water. But American logisticians respond with the numbers. Each LCVP weighs just 18,000 pounds, small enough to be hoisted by davits, stacked on transports, and launched in waves. They can land anywhere. Rocky beaches, marshes, cliffs, any surface a vehicle or soldier can crawl across. Each boat will have a number stenciled on the hull. 350, 6, 401, 242. Personal only in memory. Once the ramp drops, there's no individuality-only mission. Inside, the soldiers train for what comes next. June 5. 1944, 23:45. Orr's English Channel. The wind howls across the dark water. The swell is rising. In the troop transport USS Samuel Chase, Lieutenant John Spaulding, 1st Engineer Special Brigade, looks at the men boarding LCVP 1014. He checks his watch. H-hour -6. Remember, he tells them, run forward fast. Don't bunch up, don't look back, just go. The sergeant in the lead nods. What if the ramp sticks? Spaulding forces a half smile. Then pray to God the coxswain kicks it open. The men file into the boat. The Higgins craft rocks as it's lowered on cables into the sea. Waves crash against the plywood hull. Inside, diesel fumes mix with sweat and fear. Each LCVP pilot, called a coxswain, knows his target to the yard. They've rehearsed the run dozens of times on England's coast. But this time, it's real. And they're not coming back for hours. Dawn, June 6th, 1944, off the coast of Normandy. A low mist hangs over the horizon as the Armada comes into view. German radar stations spot echoes they can't comprehend. Hundreds of blips moving in formation. The defenders man their positions. MG nests, POC-40 anti-tank guns, mortars. They expect ships, but instead they see wave after wave of low, fast boats skipping across the shallows. Wachtmeister Otto Neumann, stationed above Utah Beach, lowers his binoculars. Those aren't warships, he mutters. No, says the lieutenant beside him. They're boxes with men inside. A shell whistles overhead, and from every direction the Higgins boats begin to land. June 6th, 1944, 6:30, et un Nours Omaha Beach, easy red sector. The ramp hits the surf with a thud. Salt water sprays inward, but no one's looking. Every eye is forward on the shore, on the bunkers, on the fire. Private Louis Ferraro's legs move before his brain catches up. He stumbles into chest-high surf, boots dragging in the pull of the undertow. The roar of MG-42 fire cuts through everything. Screams, explosions, bursts of sand. He grips his Garand like it's a life preserver. Behind him, the Higgins boat is already reversing, backing into deeper water under fire. One of the .30 caliber gunners slumps over, blood streaming down the armor plate. The coxswain, a kid no older than 20, doesn't flinch. He guns the diesel engine and turns the craft back toward the ship for another load. They were told to expect resistance. They weren't told the Atlantic Wall would spit fire. Easy red is a kill zone. German machine gun nests rake the beach in long arcs. Mortars drop with terrifying accuracy. Obstacles litter the sand. Hedgehogs, Belgian gates, mines mounted on stakes. Some men never even make it out of the boat. Others dive into the surf, crawl under fire, bury themselves in the wet sand. And still the Higgins boats keep coming. They land in staggered waves, 10 to 12 boats across, each dropping 36 men. Some carry demolition teams with Bangalore torpedoes. Others hold medics, radio operators, engineers. Every 90 seconds, another wave arrives. 7-5 hours. Omaha Beach, dog green sector. LCVP 4791 drops its ramp just short of the shingle. Inside, Captain Robert Frank of the 116th Infantry Regiment yells to his squad, "Go! Go! Move!" They splash into the water and half of them drop. A machine gun nest hidden in a concrete casemate chews through the line. Frank hits the beach crawling, ears ringing, hands bloody from the gravel. Hay looks back. His Higgins boat is gone, already turned to pick up the next squad. He's never seen a vehicle that fearless. Farther east, Utah Beach. The contrast is stark. The Higgins boats here come in with better coordination. Naval bombardment has cleared several strong points. The tide pushed them south of their intended landing zone, but by sheer chance, it works in their favor. LCVP 3012 pulls up just 40 yards from the dune line. The ramp drops, and Lieutenant Richard Winters of the 101st Airborne, freshly regrouped from his drop inland, watches the men stream out. Jeeps, towed howitzers, stacks of ammo and crates of rations all land directly onto the sand. "Efficient bastards," he mutters, watching the Higgins boat pivot and slide back into the surf like a shrimp returning to the Gulf. German High Command 9-20 Ors Château de la Roche-Guyon. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel isn't present. He's in Germany, a rare leave to visit his wife on her birthday. But General Geyer von Schweppenberg stares at the reports with growing horror. Allied landing craft in force. Utah, Omaha, Gold. Reports indicate hundreds of small transports. A Luftwaffe liaison scoffs. These boats? They'll be driven back into the sea once our reserves move. Schweppenberg doesn't respond. He's looking at aerial photos from the previous day, long lines of what appeared to be wooden crates in British ports. Not crates. Boats. They're everywhere. June 6th, afternoon off Gold Beach. Royal Navy LCTs, landing craft tank. Unload Churchills and Cromwells directly onto the beach, but between them, LCVPs dart like minnows. Each time they return with men, supplies, mortars, crates of Bren guns, jerry cans of petrol. Coxswain, Henry Jacobs, Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve, curses under his breath as he tries to steer his Higgins boat through a swell while dodging wreckage and debris. Bloody American madness, he mutters. But I'll be damned if it doesn't work. His crew drops the ramp. British infantry charge forward. One stumbles, falls, then gets up again. 10 seconds later, Jacobs reverses the boat, already turning for another load. German machine gun nest, WN-72 Omaha Beach, 11:10 hours. Inside a reinforced casemate, Unteroffizier Ernst Beck shouts for more ammunition. His MG team is down to one box of 7.92 mm rounds. He glances through the slit, and what he sees now isn't infantry. It's a Sherman tank. It's rolling, straight up the beach. How the hell? He gasps. More tanks follow. Howitzers, armored bulldozers, jeeps with machine guns, radios crackle with French, English, and even Polish voices. Beck doesn't realize it yet, but the sea itself, brought to life by thousands of plywood Higgins boats, has delivered a mechanized army onto his doorstep. Back at sea, USS Bayfield, 4 miles off Utah Beach. Colonel Eugene Caffey of the U.S. Engineers watches the surf through binoculars. Hundreds of LCVPs are making the trip now, many battered, some riddled with holes, a few still smoking from near misses. But they're still going. He turns to a young lieutenant beside him. "We owe this to a man in New Orleans," Caffey says. The lieutenant blinks. "Sir? Higgins. Built every one of those." Caffey turns back to the sea, watching a tiny silhouette bounce through the surf toward the shore, already filled with the next wave of men. June 6th, 1944, 13:45 hours, Omaha Beach, Dog White Sector. The tide is now halfway in. The sea, once dotted with thousands of gray specks, is a churned-up broth of oil, blood, wreckage, and foam. Higgins boats continue to arrive, skimming over the swells, scraping against obstacles, sometimes colliding with burning hulks of earlier landings. Coxswain, First Class Walter. Red Hamilton leans into the tiller of LCVP 3095. His face is sunburned and speckled with dried salt. He hasn't spoken much since the first wave. 2 of his crew were killed when they dropped the ramp under machine gun fire. The replacements barely had time to learn their names. Now, with the boat half full of soldiers from the 29th Infantry Division, he glances over his shoulder toward the beach. Smoke. Fire. Shattered pillboxes. But progress. "Get ready," he shouts. 2 minutes. In the hold, the men grip their rifles tighter. One clutches rosary beads. Another adjusts a flamethrower on his back. The ramp drops. This time, it's not suicide. This time, the sand is theirs. The engineering miracle. Behind the front lines, as soldiers fight tooth and nail for every hedgerow and ditch, the logistical storm begins. Hundreds of LCVPs land not just troops, but engineers, bulldozers, radio trucks, and steel matting for roads. Combat engineers spill from Higgins boats, dragging cables, blasting poles out of the sand, laying anti-tank mines in reverse for German counterattacks. Captain Samuel Wilkes, 1st Engineer Special Brigade, wipes sweat from his brow as he shouts over the roar of bulldozers. "We've got to clear lanes now, landing craft tank units coming in behind us." He watches as another Higgins boat rolls up and drops its ramp. A jeep roars off the boat before the ramp even touches the sand. It hits a patch of wet clay, skids sideways, and keeps going. Wilkes turns to his sergeant. "This is what winning looks like." Admiral Ramsey's Nerve Center, HMS Largs. 5 miles off Sword Beach. British Admiral Bertram Ramsay leans over the operations chart. Red markers indicate where Higgins boats have successfully established beachheads. Green markers show where tanks have landed. Yellow ones mean delays or destruction. So far, the board is nearly covered in red. Ramsay turns to one of his aides. Report from Gold? Over 70% of personnel and equipment ashore, sir. And the American beaches? Omaha was rough, sir, but the LCVPs didn't stop. They're landing armor now. Ramsay exhales. The wooden boxes had done the impossible, turned a beach into a highway. Bayeux countryside. June 7, 1944, 3 jours. By nightfall, thousands of Higgins boats have delivered the backbone of the Allied invasion. Inland, columns of troops begin to push through the bocage, toward Caen, toward Carentan, toward Paris. A few LCVPs lie broken and smoldering along the shore, hit by shells, crushed by tanks, or sunk by mines. But most float at anchor now, rocking gently. On one, coxswain Henry Olson checks the engine of his craft. It's taken 5 trips already. You know, he says to his mechanic. They called this thing a plywood coffin in boot camp. The mechanic laughs. Not bad for a coffin that spits out tanks. German Army Group B Headquarters. WWII, Ors-la-Roche-Guyon. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt stands silent as reports pour in. 30,000 men ashore at Utah. 50,000 across Gold and Juneau. 70,000 at Omaha and Sword. And all within 24 hours. No major ports. No concrete docks. Just ramps and sand. And Higgins boats. He mutters almost to himself. It wasn't just the numbers. It was how they got there. LCVP Graveyard, June 8, 1944, Omaha Beach. The storm has begun to roll in. Waves slam harder against the hulls now. Dozens of damaged Higgins boats lie along the beach, some with broken ramps, others splintered down the middle. Most have done 6 or 7 trips, some as many as 15. They are not meant to last. They are not monuments. They are tools, and they have delivered nearly 160,000 men in 24 hours. Private Ferraro, now dug in on the high ground behind Omaha, looks out across the sea. His hands are still shaking. His boots are still wet. He sees a boat drifting in. The same Higgins boat that dropped him off. Same coxswain, still alive, still working. He mutters under his breath, "Goddamn thing saved us." New Orleans, June 9th, 1944, Higgins Industries. The radio is loud in the factory. The workers, mostly black, Creole, Italian, Irish, pause at their benches as the broadcaster's voice cuts through the room. Over 150,000 Allied troops landed on the coast of Normandy in less than 24 hours. Cheers erupt. Women cry. Men slap each other on the back. A foreman climbs onto a crate and holds up a factory model LCVP carved from pine. You built this. Every one of you. In the office upstairs, Andrew Higgins lights a cigar, silent for once. A single photo sits on his desk, not of a medal, not of a war hero. It's a blurry snapshot taken by a war correspondent of a Higgins boat dropping its ramp on a French beach. And in the background, Victory, walking ashore. June 9, 1944, 5:45. Orsvirville-sur-Mer, Normandy. The sun creeps up behind shattered hedgerows. The roar of naval bombardment has faded, replaced by the thrum of vehicles, the bark of orders, the coughing of engines. Omaha Beach, once a graveyard, now hums like a port. The tide is out again. LCVPs sit awkwardly in the wet sand, keels settled into the clay like stranded fish. Some crews sleep inside their boats, curled around their radios or leaning against empty ammo crates. Others are preparing for yet another shuttle run, not to England this time, but farther down the coast, ferrying supplies, wounded, or reinforcements to other sectors. The Higgins boats are no longer just landing craft. They've become trucks, ambulances, ferries, and lifelines. 9:30 Ours, Utah Beach. Warrant Officer Thomas Jenkins, of the U.S. Army Transportation Corps, stands on the makeshift causeway steel matting laid across the dunes, anchored with sandbags and timbers. Before him, An LCVP glides into the shallows, guided by hand signals. 2 medics stand ready, stretchers in hand. The ramp drops. 4 wounded GIs are carried out, pale-faced and silent, their uniforms soaked with blood. They're followed by 2 supply clerks and a signalman carrying a dismantled SCR-300 radio. Jenkins nods to the coxswain. "You're going again?" The young man wipes sweat from his brow. "Sir, this boat doesn't stop unless it sinks. Inland Sainte-Mère-Église, Normandy." As paratroopers secure crossroads and engineer teams clear roads, columns of troops begin moving off the beaches. Jeeps, half-tracks, anti-tank guns, all of it landed not through ports, but straight from Higgins boats. Major Bill Lee, commander of a glider infantry unit, surveys a map on the hood of a jeep. "We're 5 miles inland. That's farther than anyone thought we'd be by day 3. A British officer beside him chuckles. "You lot brought half the bloody U.S. Army in shoeboxes." Lee glances toward the coast. Even from here, they can still hear the faint drone of the boats heading back and forth. Mulberry Harbor Assembly begins June 10th, 1944. Off Gold and Omaha beaches, Royal Engineers and U.S. Seabees begin constructing the Mulberry's artificial harbors to support sustained logistics without needing to capture a port. It's an engineering marvel, floating concrete caissons called phoenixes, sunken block ships known as gooseberries, and roadways nicknamed whales. And between these towering constructs, the ever-present Higgins boats. They dart between caissons and cranes, delivering workers, cables, anchors, and the very tools required to build the harbor. Lieutenant Edward Castle, Royal Engineers, watches from the deck of a barge. "Without the Higgins boats," he says, "this would be an impossible ballet." German response June 11th, 1944 Panzer Group West HQ. In a darkened French chateau, General Gare von Schweppenberg listens grimly as Luftwaffe reconnaissance reports come in. The Allies have not just landed. They've established a base and are reinforcing faster than expected. "Where are they landing supplies?" he asks, voice low. An aide points to the map. "Still using beaches, Omaha and Utah, and small ports like Port-en-Bessin. No ports, and yet tanks, guns, fuel." He exhales. "Higgins." "What, Herr General?" "Andrew Higgins, their boatmaker. He built this invasion as surely as Eisenhower." June 12, 1944, 6 hours, British sector, Arromanches. A group of Canadian engineers unloads crates of ammunition from an LCVP. The surf is calmer now, the tide higher. But still, the plywood hull bobs gently, nose pressed into the sand. One soldier pauses to look at the boat. "Ugly thing." His sergeant spits into the water. "That ugly thing just won us the beach, mate." Back in the channel, return to England. For some Higgins boats, the run is now reversed. Loaded with wounded men, damaged equipment, and intelligence officers carrying captured German maps, they retreat across the channel. Some head to hospital ships, others to cargo vessels waiting offshore. One LCVP 4,519 limps along at half speed, its portside patched with canvas and rope. The coxswain sings under his breath to keep himself awake. The soldier beside him, his arm bandaged, face pale, chuckles. Not exactly first class. The coxswain smiles. Beats swimming. June 13, 1944 Normandy. The numbers speak louder than propaganda. Over 850 LCVPs landed in Normandy within the first week. By day 7, nearly 300,000 Allied troops are ashore. By day 14, over 100,000 vehicles, from jeeps to Sherman tanks. And still the Higgins boats keep going. They run until their hulls split, until their engines die, until their ramps seize in the salt. Then they're stripped for parts, burned for warmth, or left to rot on the beach their purpose fulfilled. Not one was designed to return home. In London's Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, General Eisenhower reads a field report from Omaha Beach. LCVP losses high, but operational tempo uninterrupted. Recommend increased production from U.S. Gulf Coast. He pens a note beside it. Higgins was right. Then he picks up the phone. Get me logistics. We'll need 10,000 more. June 14, 1944, 5:30 hours, Sword Beach, Normandy. A low fog clings to the sand as another convoy of Higgins boats glides toward the shore. Their flat hulls cut silently through the surf, engines humming beneath the morning gulls. In one, Royal Engineers manhandle a Bailey Bridge segment lashed to the boat's deck. In another, crates of 25-pounder artillery shells rattle against the sides. A third carries Scottish infantrymen, bagpipes silent for now. The invasion is no longer an assault. It's a machine, and at the heart of it, still are the LCVPs. They land men. They land guns. They land hope. 9:15 hours, American sector, Utah Beach. Private James Allen, 4th Infantry Division, watches a Higgins boat pull up beside a sunken German obstacle. Its ramp drops. 6 men jump off carrying barrels of aviation fuel, sloshing and unsteady. Behind them, another boat arrives with an armored bulldozer that immediately roars to life and begins clearing debris. Allen mutters to his squad leader, "This beach was hell a week ago." Sergeant Carson doesn't look away from the work. "Hell got paved by plywood and diesel, kid." He's right. What began as an improvised invasion has turned into a floating conveyor belt of war. The assembly line of victory behind the lines. Further inland, the Red Ball Express begins forming truck convoys that will race supplies to the front as fast as they can be offloaded. But before the trucks roll, the Higgins boats must deliver. Every gun, every box of rations, every tank of gasoline, every spool of radio cable all pass through the hands of coxswains, sailors, and beachmasters who ride the tides in those squat wooden craft. They operate with surgical timing. An LCVP lands every 90 seconds. 1 by 1, 2 by 2. By now, most have names stenciled on their hulls. Bourbon Belle, Liberty Lass, Bayou Queen. Painted with teeth, pin-up girls, saints and flags. Personal, fierce, forgotten as soon as the next wave hits the shore. Bayeux, first liberated city in France. June 14th brings with it the liberation of Bayeux, the first French town to fall under Allied control since D-Day. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Canham, 116th Infantry Regiment, addresses a group of French resistance fighters outside the town square. "You helped hold this line," he tells them. "But it was the boats that got us here." An older man in a beret speaks up. "You mean the warships?" "No," Canham says, shaking his head. "The little ones, the ones that never stopped coming. LCVP maintenance camp, near Port-en-Bessin. The wear and tear is enormous. On the shoreline behind the lines, Seabees and mechanics patch hulls with plywood and marine glue. Saltwater eats through the joints. Sand grinds into the engines. Bullet holes pock the sides of some. Corporal Anthony Nguyen, U.S. Navy mechanic, lies flat under a Higgins boat suspended on logs. A cracked rudder shaft. Again, "This thing's held together by willpower," he mutters. His partner grins. "And Louisiana swamp magic." June 15th. 1944 Panzer Lehr Division arrives. At last, the Germans respond. From the south, one of Germany's most elite armored units, Panzer Lehr, arrives to counterattack near Saint and Saint-Lô. But the Allies are ready. Why? Because intelligence teams, reconnaissance squads, and forward observers all landed on Higgins boats and sent reports back via radio before the tanks even crossed the Orne. Thanks to constant resupply via LCVPs, the Allies have the manpower, artillery, and fuel to hold them back. What the Wehrmacht sees now is not an improvised beachhead. It's a wall of steel built not behind fortresses, but laid down by thousands of plywood ramps. German POW camp near Colville. Captured Oberleutnant Hans Richter stares at a beach through the wire of his makeshift compound. A line of Higgins boats lands in the background, one after another. He turns to an American interrogator. "Why so many? Why risk such fragile boats?" The interrogator replies calmly. "Because they weren't meant to survive, just to land." Richter says nothing. He has no answer, no equivalent in the Wehrmacht, no counter to such audacity. The true shock isn't just the invasion, it's that it never stopped. Back in England, production continues. In New Orleans, Higgins Industries runs around the clock. Workers work 10-hour shifts. Women operate drills. Black welders and white carpenters build side by side. Supervisors run down rows of nearly finished hulls yelling part numbers. New blueprints come in from Washington, minor refinements, improved rudder gears, reinforced ramps. Higgins himself walks through the warehouse floor, trailing cigar smoke and rage at every inefficiency. "We're not building boats," he growls. "We're building freedom. You understand that?" The foreman nods. The next batch is due by Thursday, evening June 15th, 1944, Omaha Beach. The surf is quiet. The tide is low again. Private Ferraro sits beside a crater, writing a letter home. His hands still shake a little. His boots are caked with dry blood and sand. In the distance, a Higgins boat motors back to sea. Its ramp creaks. Its engine rattles. But it goes. It always goes. "They said it looked like a box," Ferraro writes. "But out here, that box carries the world." June 17th, 1944, Omaha Beach, Normandy. By now, the beach is unrecognizable. From the hellscape it was just 11 days ago. Steel mats form crude roadways stretching inland. Cranes swing over piles of ammo crates. Bulldozers rumble across churned sand. Jeeps honk impatiently at fuel trucks clogging improvised traffic lanes. Engineers hammer new piers from sunken ships and scrap. And still, the Higgins boats come. Hundreds. Some arrive empty, returning from hospital ships. Others carry mailbags, signal corps, cables, even chaplains. LCVP 2287 rumbles into the surf, its bow nudging gently against a broken section of German anti-landing obstacles. The ramp drops. A Catholic priest steps down into the sand, robes fluttering behind him. He's followed by a crate marked "Communion Kits, Chaplain's Corps." On a different beach, another boat delivers 3 German POWs under guard. Another delivers 20 new replacements straight from Plymouth. Another hauls a .50 caliber machine gun nest and sandbags. This is not invasion anymore. This is permanence. June 19th, 1944, the storm hits. The English Channel roars with fury. For 3 straight days, winds rise to over 50 miles per hour. Rain lashes sideways, waves surge up to 6 meters high. And the Higgins boats, light, flat-bottomed, fast suffer. Many are smashed against their own motherships. Some vanish entirely beneath the waves. Over 800 vessels of various classes are damaged. A few hundred Higgins boats are destroyed or rendered unusable. On the beach, LCVPs are dragged inland to prevent them from being lost to the tide. Coxswain Walter Hamilton and his crew work through the night, roping down LCVP 3095 with sandbags and makeshift anchors. Rain pours down his face. His hands are blistered and raw. "We've survived mortars, machine guns, mines," he shouts to his bow gunner. "If this boat sinks in a damn storm, I swear I'll haunt the ocean." The bow gunner laughs through chattering teeth. "She ain't pretty, but she's stubborn. They make it through. Most don't." But by June 23rd, the survivors are back in the water, patched, stained, splintered, still running, behind enemy lines' night infiltrations. Not all Higgins boats operate in daylight. Some LCVPs are refitted for silent landings. Muffled engines, no hull numbers, painted black. These are used by commandos, OSS agents, and special reconnaissance teams. June 24, 1944, Normandy coastline, night. An unmarked LCVP glides silently toward a rocky inlet east of Cherbourg. Inside are 4 French resistance fighters, 2 British SOE agents, and a map wrapped in oilcloth. They don't speak. They don't need to. The boat doesn't drop its ramp. It noses into a cleft between rocks, and the team scrambles off the side. The coxswain doesn't wait. He reverses instantly, disappearing into the surf like smoke. The landing never happened. The LCVP leaves no trace, and yet it shapes the battlefield. July 1944, Operation Cobra gears up. The breakout is coming. After weeks of hedgerow fighting, General Omar Bradley's forces prepare to launch Operation Cobra, the massive push into central France. Logistics now dominate every Allied staff meeting. How many shells can be landed per hour? How fast can we resupply frontline fuel? And in every calculation, one thing is constant: the Higgins boats. They are landing 1,200 tons of supplies daily across the Normandy beaches, without ports, without rails, just sea, sand, and ramps. Some LCVPs are now modified to tow pontoon bridges. Others carry prefabricated airstrip mats. In the words of Major General Henry Terrell, "They're not boats, they're arteries. You cut them off, the body dies." German intelligence, cracking the code. Captured German documents reveal growing confusion. Field reports describe an endless river of American craft landing beyond artillery range. One Wehrmacht report states, "We believe they have a portable port. They move it daily. The craft they use are fast, expendable, and without fear. They seem to have no shortage of them." They're not wrong. Higgins boats are now being reassembled on French soil. Kits shipped across the channel flat-packed, then built in forward maintenance yards. The U.S. has effectively turned the Normandy coastline into a moving harbor. July 7th, 1944, General Eisenhower's tour. Ike steps off a Higgins boat onto Gold Beach. He's met by a British liaison and a jeep, but before he boards the vehicle, he turns to the boat behind him. The coxswain, covered in oil and salt, offers a silent salute. Eisenhower returns it. "Tell Higgins," Ike mutters to his aide. "His boats haven't stopped working since the 6th. I'll wire New Orleans, sir." "Don't. Just build more." In the channel, LCVP 1012 sinks. Not all stories end in glory. LCVP 1012, carrying supplies to an anti-aircraft unit inland, is hit by a drifting mine during a return trip. The explosion lifts the boat out of the water and drops it in 2 pieces. 3 men are killed. 2 survive, found clinging to a floating section of the ramp, later picked up by a destroyer. The ship's chaplain reads them a psalm. "Even the vessels of war are not built for eternity," he says softly, "but what they carry that endures." Late July, French civilians reclaim the shore. In villages along the coast, children play in the skeletons of Higgins boats. Some are half buried in sand. Others lie tilted on rocks, hulls riddled with bullet holes. A girl climbs into the coxswain seat of one, pretending to steer. A boy shouts orders from the ramp. None of them understand what these boats really meant. Not yet, but someday they will. August 15th, 1944, 4:12 hours, off the coast of southern France. Darkness veils the Mediterranean as waves slap against steel hulls. Offshore, a new invasion fleet holds position: destroyers, cruisers, troop ships silent and loaded. But it's not the capital ships that will strike first. It's the Higgins boats. Painted olive drab and navy gray, their hulls now show sun-bleached scars from past landings. Bullet holes, patches, names half scraped off. Yet they're still afloat. In LCVP 3148, Staff Sergeant Harold Mendez checks his gear: bar, ammo belt, grenade pouch. The men beside him are from the 36th Infantry Division, the Texas Division. They shift restlessly as the boat lurches in the swells. The coxswain calls over his shoulder, "2 minutes." No one answers. They've done this before, some at Sicily, others at Salerno, many at Normandy, and they know what comes next. Operation Dragoon begins. As the sun rises over the Côte d'Azur, over 800 Higgins boats surge toward the beaches of Provence. German defenses here are lighter than at Normandy. Fewer bunkers, fewer mines, but the risk remains. Resistance pockets, snipers in villas, machine guns hidden in vineyards. Yet wave after wave of LCVPs slam ashore with ruthless precision. The ramps drop, men charge forward, jeep tires dig into the sand. French commandos raise tricoloras over beach houses. And by sundown, over 94,000 Allied troops have landed. Most arrived in Higgins boats. Again, southern France, day 3. The beaches are secure. But the fight is inland now, into hilltop towns, across fields of sunflowers and wine grapes. And the Higgins boats? They're still at work, delivering reinforcements, towing barges, hauling wounded to hospital ships. One LCVP brings in crates marked Liberté, printed newspapers to distribute across liberated towns. Another carries French civilians, rescued from German reprisals, wrapped in army blankets and holding children close. Captain Jules Marchand of the Free French Forces kisses the hull of one LCVP as he disembarks. "She smells like engine oil and freedom," he says. New theater, same boat. From 1942 to 1945, the Higgins boat will serve in every major amphibious landing the U.S. undertakes. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Leyte, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, North Africa, Sicily, Salerno, Normandy, southern France. Each time, it carries men into the teeth of fire. Each time, it comes back, or doesn't. But the mission continues. Because it's not the boat that matters. It's what it brings. Pacific Theater LCVP in the Coral Islands. September 1944 Peleliu, Palau Islands. Coral reefs rip through the underbellies of larger landing craft. But the LCVPs, shallow and quick, bounce over the reef with brutal force. In one boat, a flamethrower team clutches their tanks. In another, a radio unit prepares to call naval fire support the second the ramp drops. Higgins boats are now painted with camouflage netting and coated with sand to reduce shine. Some have armor plates bolted to the bow. Others have sandbags piled high behind the coxswain seat. The Marines call them death boxes. They hate them. They also owe them their lives. New tactics, same hero. By late 1944, tactics evolve. Higgins boats now coordinate with rocket-firing LSMRs, smoke-laying destroyers, and close air support. They land not just in the first wave, but in time succession, based on shifting front lines and terrain intelligence. Beachmasters, some just sergeants with whistles and clipboards, guide dozens of boats per minute. It's chaotic. It's dangerous. And it works. On the shores of Leyte, a Higgins boat lands two M5 Stuarts that help punch through a Japanese counterattack. On Iwo Jima, they drop demolition teams with satchel charges to blast open cave bunkers. On Okinawa, they land flame tanks and mortars into rain-slicked killing fields. A floating paradox. The LCVP is absurdly simple. Marine plywood hull, steel ramp and fittings, 2 30 caliber, machine guns, 1 diesel engine, crew of 3, capacity for 36 troops, or a jeep. Yet it defeated some of the most fortified beaches in military history, and it cost about $5,200 to build the price of a used car. For comparison, a Sherman tank cost $3 million, a Liberty ship, $2 million, a B-17 Flying Fortress, $250,000. But no tank, no ship, no plane could land a soldier directly into the war like an LCVP could. It was cheap. It was expendable. It was indispensable. Recognition begins. In New Orleans, reporters begin calling Higgins the man who launched 1 million lives. Eisenhower repeats his praise publicly. Andrew Higgins is the man who won the war for us. The press picks it up. Factories get more funding. Production ramps continue. Labor shortages are solved by expanding hiring across racial and gender lines, a rare move in the segregated Deep South. Higgins shrugs off the spotlight. He walks the production floor every day, curses the delay of a steel shipment, sends a telegram to the War Department demanding more copper rivets. He knows the fight isn't over. He knows his boats are needed again and again and again. Back in France, August 25th, 1944, Paris is liberated. The radios crackle with static, then cheers. The French 2nd Armored Division has entered Paris. The Eiffel Tower is visible again. Flags hang from every balcony. Church bells ring across the city. And yet, as thousands pour into the streets, far away on the coast, Higgins boats still run supplies ashore, still bring in medics, still shuttle engineers to repair roads and bridges. None of them are there for the headlines. But without them, the headlines don't happen. December 16th, 1944, Antwerp, Belgium. The snow falls in thick, silent sheets. Trucks grind along frozen roads, engines coughing in protest. American GIs wear white camo ponchos now, barely distinguishable from the terrain. Somewhere in the dark Ardennes forest, the German counteroffensive Operation Walk am Rhein has begun. The Battle of the Bulge is underway, and behind the chaos, behind the lines, behind the crumpled front, a miracle is in motion. From Normandy to Cherbourg to Antwerp, an uninterrupted stream of supplies flows through battered ports, hastily repaired rail lines, and Higgins boats. December 20th, 1944, Port of Le Havre. A Liberty ship offloads fuel drums and crates of K rations. But the cranes are too slow. The dock is damaged, and the German Luftwaffe still threatens overhead. So out come the LCVPs. Dozens of them. Fast, low profile, hard to hit. Their decks now stacked high with supplies, barrels lashed down with rope. They ferry cargo directly from anchored ships to the shore and up the rivers. In some cases, they're even winched onto trucks and driven inland like trailers, then offloaded into forward depots. Lieutenant Grace Carlson, U.S. Army Transportation Corps, watches one LCVP bump against a loading platform. "That boat's been running since D-Day," she mutters. The deckhand beside her nods. They don't die. They just fade into the mud. January 1945, river crossings and frozen fronts. The Higgins boats were designed for beaches, but now they're conquering rivers. The Meuse, the Rhine, the Ruhr. At night, under blackout conditions, LCVPs are used to ferry troops across foggy water under sniper fire. Engineers lash canvas over their ramps to prevent glare. Infantrymen huddle on the deck, rifles in hand, ready to scramble the moment the ramp drops. At one crossing near Dinant, Belgium, a squad from the 82nd Airborne lands silently behind German lines, using a reconfigured Higgins boat painted entirely in matte black. They cut a cable line, blow a bridge with satchel charges, and vanish back across the river before sunrise. Without a splash, without a trace. March 1945, the Rhine is breached. Operation Plunder begins. Montgomery's forces stage an audacious amphibious assault across the Rhine, Germany's last great natural barrier. And at the forefront, once again, are the LCVPs. More than 1,000 landing craft, mostly Higgins boats, ferry British and American troops across the wide, fast-flowing river. The Germans believed it impossible, just as they had in Sicily, in Salerno, in Normandy. But by dawn, U.S. 9th Army units are ashore. Firefights erupt in the farmlands east of the river, and the wooden ramps drop again, for what seems like the 1,000th time, onto another bank of contested soil. General William Simpson of the 9th Army radios Eisenhower one sentence: "The Higgins boat has landed us in Germany. Berlin is in sight." By April 1945, the war in Europe is nearing its end. Soviet forces close in on Berlin from the east. The Western Allies drive from the west. But the logistics, the fuel, the food, the constant stream of men and machines never stop. LCVPs now operate in every major port and inland waterway west of the Elbe. Some are reconfigured as temporary ambulance boats. Others have been converted into mobile radio stations or floating kitchens. One even serves as a chapel. A field priest holds mass aboard its splintered deck for men too wounded to walk ashore. These boats were never meant for this, but they adapt, just like the men they carry. May 8th, 1945 volts, E-Day. Victory in Europe. Crowds dance in Times Square. Big Ben chimes over jubilant Londoners. The Eiffel Tower sparkles as Parisians sing in the streets. Flags wave. Beer flows. Soldiers cry. But along the battered coastline of France, in the quiet, wind-blown dunes of Normandy, dozens of Higgins boats sit abandoned in tall grass, their plywood hulls split by weather and war. Some are used as storage sheds by farmers. Others are dragged inland and repurposed as chicken coops, greenhouses, or even homes. One sits half-buried at Omaha, its ramp still open as if waiting for one last order to charge. Back home, New Orleans, Louisiana, at the Higgins Industries Yard, Workers gather for a ceremony. War's over in Europe. Some factories will shut down. Others will retool for the Pacific. But on this day, they pause. Andrew Higgins, older now, eyes sunken with exhaustion, stands before a crowd of welders, carpenters, engineers, and riveters. He doesn't read a speech. He just lifts a piece of plywood from the hull of an LCVP, blackened with soot and seawater. "This landed at Utah Beach," he says. "It carried 36 men. 2 of them died. The rest took France back from the Nazis." Silence. Then applause. Then tears. Legacy at sea and sand. By war's end, more than 23,000 Higgins boats will be produced. They will land over 1.3 million Allied troops, serve in every major theater of World War II, be used by 30 nations post-war, inspire the U.S. Navy's future amphibious doctrine. They weren't armored. They weren't fast. They weren't glamorous. But they were enough. And sometimes, enough is everything. April 1945, Normandy veteran return. Months later, a few U.S. engineers revisit Omaha Beach during cleanup operations. One finds an old LCVP, hull number 3961, rotting in the dunes. He walks up to it, brushes sand from its bow, then steps inside and sits down in the coxswain's seat. He rests his hands on the throttle and looks toward the sea. Nothing moves, but in his mind, he hears the engine again, smells the oil, feels the vibration, sees the ramp drop, and for a brief moment, he's 21 again, charging into history aboard a wooden boat that no one thought would matter. August 1945, Pacific Ocean, off the coast of Okinawa. The wind howls across a gray, endless sea. Black clouds bruise the horizon as waves hammer the hulls of U.S. Navy transports off Okinawa's coast. Rain pelts the decks. The monsoon season has come, and yet the war is not over. LCVP 7743 bobs in the swells, tied to the side of USS Lamar like a dog straining at its leash. Its paint is blistered. The ramp sticks when wet. Salt has chewed through the rivets in the gunner's nest. One of the side panels is held together with steel wire and hope. And still, it runs. On deck, Lieutenant Roland Hasegawa, U.S. Navy Amphibious Forces, scans the beachhead through his binoculars. "We're sending the next wave as soon as the weather breaks." A Marine sergeant nearby laughs bitterly. "Sir, we don't need the weather to break. We've got Higgins boats." He's not wrong. April to August, 1945, Okinawa and the endgame. In Okinawa, the last, bloodiest, and largest amphibious landing in the Pacific, over 1,300 LCVPs take part in the operation. They ferry the first waves of Marines ashore, then tanks, then mortars, then bulldozers. They bring up water, munitions, and food. They carry the wounded out, sometimes 15 or 20 men lying on the deck, side by side, their blood washing into the bilge. Some run 4 trips a day. Some never come back. Many are crewed by men barely out of high school, coxswains who learned to dock a landing craft before they learned to shave, gunners who fired their first .30 caliber from a rolling deck under machine gun fire. LCVPs are now being used to deliver napalm barrels, radar units, CB construction teams, flamethrower tanks, and corpses. This isn't just invasion. It's occupation. And Higgins boats don't stop. August 6 and 9, 1945, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world changes in an instant. No, LCVP sees it directly. They are not bombers. They do not drop fire from the sky. But when the mushroom clouds rise and the war in the Pacific ends, the boats are there waiting off the Japanese coast, loaded, ready, silent. LCVPs are among the first craft to approach the battered Japanese ports. Their ramps drop again, not to war, but to surrender. White flags wave from dockyards that once fired on these plywood boats with everything they had. Now, they float in peace. The 2nd of September 1945, Tokyo Bay. On the deck of the USS Missouri, Japanese officials sign the instrument of surrender. In the harbor below, a long line of U.S. landing craft, including LCVPs, sit at idle. Their crews watch the ceremony through binoculars or from the gunwales, leaning quietly against their boats. None of them are mentioned in the speeches, but they were there at the beginning, and they are here at the end. Aftermath. From combat to cargo. In the months following the surrender, thousands of Higgins boats remain overseas. Some are used to ferry occupation forces into Tokyo, Yokohama, and Sasebo. Others land aid workers and Red Cross teams in Manila, Shanghai, and Seoul. In France, liberated civilians use old LCVPs to cross rivers where bridges haven't been rebuilt. In Italy, one becomes a ferry between villages on Lake Garda. In the Philippines, fishermen turn surplus Higgins boats into long-haul cargo carriers. They rip off the gun mounts, paint the hulls in tropical colors, and bolt on tarpaulin roofs. Some of these boats will keep running for decades. The fate of the ramp. Thousands of LCVPs are scrapped after the war. Others are sold at auction, $300 apiece, as is. A few survive. In museums. In barns. On private beaches. At the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, one fully restored Higgins boat sits on display. Visitors climb inside. They run their hands along the iron ramp. They take photos and ask questions. But they cannot know. Not really. Not what it meant to stand behind that ramp, heart pounding, deck swaying, waiting for it to drop, to hear the metal slam into sand, and know there's no going back. Andrew Higgins, the man behind the boat. After the war, Andrew Higgins returns to civilian life. His factories wind down. His workers scatter. Some go to Detroit. Some stay. Some never return from Europe or the Pacific. He is awarded medals, honors, recognition from Congress. But he never forgets what the boats were for. "I didn't build them to be remembered," he says once in an interview. "I built them so boys could get home." He dies in 1852, heart failure, 66, a private funeral. No speeches, just a folded flag and a photo of a ramp hitting the beach. Legacy. The U.S. military will spend the next century designing newer, faster landing craft, but they'll always come back to one idea. Simple, tough, relentless. Just like Higgins, the LCVP becomes a blueprint not just for warfare, but for mobility. For the idea that power doesn't lie in armor or size, but in the ability to show up, anywhere, anytime. Today, in combat operations around the world, when troops land by sea, the ghosts of the Higgins boats are with them. Every ramp dropped in a storm. Every beach claimed under fire. Every soldier who steps into a vessel, built not to survive but to deliver. Final image, Omaha Beach, 2025. A school group walks along the cliffs above Omaha. Below, in the surf, a weathered silhouette lies half buried in sand. A Higgins boat, rusted through, its ramp still facing the sea. The teacher points. "That helped win the war," she says. The children stare. It doesn't look like much. Just a wooden box with rusted bolts. But to those who knew those who lived, it was more than a boat. It was the first step into hell, and the ramp out of it.